How is it possible that Ferrari has achieved its best result of the season in one of the shortest and most demanding circuits of the calendar, while McLaren continued to show an unquestionable superiority? What is behind this apparent rebirth? What happened in Austria was much deeper than the final positions show. Ferrari began the 2025 season with a heavy emotional and sports load. The team arrived from a 2024 in which it had given clear recovery signs, ending as runner-up of the World Cup, and with Charles Leclerc reaching third place in the pilot table. However, despite the growth and obvious operational improvement under the management of Frederic Vasseur, the ghosts of the past continued to merit in each strategic decision poorly executed, in each pit's error, and above all, in the inability of the car to perform consistently over a full weekend. All that dragged legacy was condensed in the first two races of the year. All this happened in an environment in which McLaren not only showed rhythm, but operational confidence. Every weekend that passed, it seemed that woking those of their car better, while Ferrari could not answer basic questions about his car. In what conditions was it more competitive? At what exact height should the background operate to maximize the soil effect without compromising stability? How to avoid premature wear of the plank without sacrificing curves? These doubts were too big for a team that aspired to play the championship. Austria's GP then became a kind of symbolic ultimatum. Ferrari could not afford another weekend full of empty promises and disappointing results. It was now or never. The pressure was maximum, both for the equipment and for the pilots. The cameras were focused on Leclerc, hoping to repeat a brilliant performance as in their Abu Dhabi comeback of the previous year. And Hamilton, after two major awards in which he could barely show flashes of his capacity, arrived in Spielberg with the urgency of demonstrating that his signing was not simply a marketing play. The stage was served. The question was if Ferrari was going to answer. And he did. The true turning point for Ferrari in Austria did not occur under the reflectors or was announced with drums and dishes. Unlike other shields that tend to expose their great evolutions with pride and expectation, Ferrari opted for a much more silent route. But that decision was not accidental. The SF25 had been a deeply unstable car during the first major awards. He had potential, yes, but each race looked like a Russian roulette. A car that could touch the podium if everything aligned or be out of the points for tiny details. So, instead of introducing partial changes or patches on the initial concept, in Maranello a firmer determination was taken. Directly attack the soul of the car. That soul was the floor of the SF25. Specifically, the way in which it generated aerodynamic load through the soil effect. The initial version of the car's floor forced Ferrari to operate with higher heights from the ideal, a decision made by necessity, not by preference. Because as soon as they tried to lower the car to the ground, as the dominant teams do to squeeze the maximum grip, the SF25 became unpredictable, unstable, and worse, it began to wear out the wooden plank at an unacceptable rhythm. This situation forced the team to use the lift and coast technique more frequently than desired, seriously harming the career rhythm. In Austria, Ferrari presented the deepest update from the Bahrain GP. It was an integral redesign of the floor architecture, which included a new geometry in the front fences, which passed from a staggered design to an arched, more fluid. This simple change completely transformed the way the vortices generated and directed the air flow to the critical area of the Venturi. It was not a visual adjustment, it was a structural alteration of pressure flow under the car. And most importantly, he began to solve the chronic instability that had conditioned them so much. But they didn't stop there. The central boat zone was also redesigned and the volume of the diffuser was optimized, a key section to maximize air expansion and increase the load without penalizing the drag. Italian engineers sought a more efficient distribution of pressures that allow the car to operate more stable even in conditions of high mechanical stress. The result was a constant aerodynamic load gain along the entire operating range of the car, something that the SF25 had not achieved until then. It was no longer just about having a fast car in ideal conditions, but one that could offer predictable performance even when the track or weather did not accompany. The really interesting thing is that Ferrari not only won load, he also extended his operational window. Now they could run lower, yes, but also with greater margin of tolerance before falling into instability. This unlocked new possibilities in the tuning and tire strategy. It allowed them to adjust the suspension more aggressively, the angles of attack of the ailerons, and even optimize the cooling because everything was more integrated. And on a layout like Red Bull Ring, short, technical, and demanding with the rear train, that consistency was pure gold. From the first moment, Leclerc and Hamilton avoided falling into the habitual chaos traps of the first round. Clean positioning, good reaction at the output, and, above all, zero contact. That serenity was the first indication that something different was about to happen. Throughout the first laps, both pilots maintained a competitive rhythm, not spectacular, but solid enough to stay close to the group that fought for the podium. While other teams began to show wear on strategic tires and mismatches, Ferrari maintained its course. There were no hurry, there were no unnecessary risks. It was a race conducted with cold heads. But the most decisive came with the early elimination of Max Verstappen. The Dutch, who had started from the bottom, suffered a technical problem in the first laps and was forced to leave. That decline changed the dynamics of the event completely. Suddenly, the podium was open for those who knew how to read the race in real time, and Ferrari smelled blood. The technical team on the wall immediately reacted. They began to adjust their strategy, lengthening the first Leclerc stint while precisely monitored the rhythm of the McLaren. The key was not to copy the plan of the leaders, but adapt to their rhythm without compromising the integrity of the car or the tires. Hamilton, meanwhile, played a fundamental role as tactical squire. He knew he did not have the pace to directly attack Norris, but he understood that his work was to keep the Mercedes behind and any remaining red. The British used all his experience, managing the tires with surgical softness and choosing the exact moments to press or give space. At no time did he get off the important positions, and although he did not have real podium chances, his fourth place was as valuable as the third of Leclerc. Another crucial aspect was the execution in boxes. Ferrari has been historically criticized for his errors in the stops, but in Austria they showed a millimeter coordination. The stops were fast, clean, without blockages or confusion in the timing. That detail, which usually goes unnoticed in a weekend without failures, was key to keep Leclerc ahead of its direct rivals. Every second that was not lost, there was a second that had to be recovered on the track. The final phase of the race was a control lesson. Leclerc kept his persecutors at bay, handling the distance, without entering unnecessary duels, knowing that the podium was within reach if he did not make mistakes. The Monegasco did not forge the mechanics, did not stress the tires, simply executed with a tactical maturity that remembered his best days of 2022. When he crossed the finish line in third position behind Norris and Piastri, he did it not as a pilot who had encountered a result, but as someone who had built it back. The fourth place of Hamilton sealed the best joint result of the year for Ferrari. Not due to pure speed but par excellence in execution. This race was a masterclass of how to maximize a car that is not the best, but that, in the right hands and with the right decisions, can overcome anyone. Ferrari did not win the race but won something equally important: credibility. And in such a closed season, that can be worth more than an isolated victory. What happened in Austria left Ferrari in an unexpected but encouraging position. After a first part of the season full of uncertainty, strategic errors, and a worrying lack of technical consistency, the podium of Charles Leclerc and the fourth place of Lewis Hamilton represented more than valuable points in the championship. They meant a deep respite in the middle of a competitive storm that seemed not to have truce. However, for a team like Ferrari, the big question is not whether they can have a good weekend, but if they can sustain that level throughout a championship. Because in Formula One, a single flash is not enough to build a winning narrative. Austria showed that the SF25 has a higher competitive roof than many thought. The ground update, the improvement in the operational window, and the reduction of the need for the lift and coast opened the door to a more versatile car, more usable in different types of circuits. But the true test will come on clues with very different characteristics, where not only aerodynamic stability is needed, but also traction, efficiency in long braking, and thermal resistance in extreme conditions. If that Ferrari is able to replicate what was done in Spielberg on paths such as Silverstone, Hungaroring, or Suzuka, then we will be talking about a new real beginning. In addition, there is the human factor. Leclerc needs to continue showing Austria's tactical maturity without falling into the anxiety of constantly demonstrating that he is the natural leader of the team. Hamilton, meanwhile, must continue its process of adaptation to SF25, which, although it advanced greatly in Austria, has not yet reached its roof. The internal harmony of the team will also be crucial. A wall of synchronized pits, without contradictory decisions, with clarity of leadership and vision in the medium term. In recent years, Ferrari has sinned with a lack of structure at decisive times, and there is no margin of error if they want to compete for the championship. Austria can be interpreted as a signal. A confirmation that technical work is performing fruits, that strategic decisions are beginning to refine, and perhaps that the direction taken by Vasseur begins to consolidate. But an isolated signal does not build a path. What will define 2025 for Ferrari is not this podium, but what they do with it. If they understand it as the first step of a sustainable streak and not as an exception held, then we can be before the true rebirth of the Scuderia.